President Vladimir Zelensky pushed forward in his campaign of global persuasion, pleading with allies for a no-fly zone over his country. Those calls continue to be rejected, but Washington's language towards Moscow is sharpening.
I think he is a war criminal.
Will you be meeting with him?
Intentionally targeting civilians is a war crime.
The U.S. State Department says it's not seeing any meaningful effort from Russia to end the war through diplomacy. Derek Chollet is undersecretary at the State Department. He was in Europe days before Russia's invasion, pushing for diplomacy and de-escalation. I spoke to him about what more the U.S. and Canada can do to help Ukraine. Derek Chollet, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
If NATO is not going to participate in a no-fly zone over Ukraine, can countries like Canada and the U.S. really say that they are doing everything they can for the Ukrainians?
Well, Canada and the United States and many other countries around the world are providing the Ukrainians with a significant amount of military assistance. Just in the last several days, the United States has signed out $1 billion of military assistance for the Ukrainians, and that's going to anti-armor, anti-tank, anti-aircraft weapons. And so we are doing everything we can to provide Ukraine with the defense needs that it requires.
Well, you're saying everything we can to provide defense needs, but you know better than I do that what they are asking for is this no-fly zone. Is there any variation on what they are asking? Protection for a humanitarian corridor, airlifts, any scenario where you can imagine that NATO forces would be involved in such a thing?
No, President Biden's been very clear that the U.S. military is not going to be involved directly in the Ukraine conflict, but that's why we are so focused on providing them these defensive needs that they require, like these anti-armor, anti-aircraft weapons.
Your own administration has talked about the prospect that Vladimir Putin could use chemical weapons. What would that mean for the involvement of Western forces?
Well, it would be catastrophic, of course, in terms of for the Ukrainian people. President Biden's been very clear that he would face severe consequences if he used those weapons. And I think this is an area where the United States needs to stand with Canada and the rest of the world to make very clear to Putin that there would be vast consequences if he were to do this.
Such as?
Well, clearly further economic isolation and punishment. But then, of course, we will have to look across a range of options that we have. I don't want to get ahead of the president of what we might do, but it's quite clear that this would cross a threshold in the international community, the use of chemical weapons or, God forbid, a nuclear weapon. I think this kind of talk by President Putin is completely irresponsible. It's dangerous, and it would be a grave mistake if he were to use these weapons.
And yet, I mean, we both know that the severe consequences have yet to stop him. And in fact, we keep seeing increasingly horrifying scenes out of Ukraine. I do want to ask you, though, about something else that your president said, which was referring to Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. If that is indeed the case, will he face justice for those crimes?
Well, President Biden and Secretary Blinken have both said that in their views, he is a war criminal. His military is targeting civilians. They're hitting hospitals. They're hitting theaters where it's clearly marked the children are there being sheltered. There will be a proper investigation. The United States, working with partners around the world, is gathering the evidence and will treat that evidence accordingly to have a proper legal process to bring about charges of war crimes. But it's quite clear that however this war ends, and Ukraine is going to be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin, that the United States, the rest of the world, will have to participate and be committed to helping Ukraine far into the future to rebuild from this terrible devastation that Vladimir Putin is bringing about inside Ukraine.
I do want to talk about the working together that is happening right now, specifically this NATO meeting in Brussels that both Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden are going to be at. Canada's defense minister was asked about our NATO spending this week, and she said that she is considering, as she put it, aggressive options. That she is putting options on the table as Canada's government considers its next budget. Options where it could surpass the 2% spending of GDP, meet that 2%, or fall short of it. As Canada's cabinet, as the Prime Minister considers what to do when it comes to military spending, because right now, as I'm sure you know, we fall quite short of the mark, what would you hope to see from Canada?
Well, all 30 NATO allies have signed up to the so-called Wales Pledge, which is that all of them by 2024 will be spending 2% of their GDP on defense needs. And so, of course, we hope that Canada, like all other NATO allies, would fulfill that Wales Pledge. But I think this conflict has shown once again the urgent military needs that we face in Europe, the threat that Russia poses, which may have seemed theoretical to some not so long ago, is very real today. The United States has made some very important decisions to increase its own defense in Europe. And of course, that starts first and foremost with the assistance to the Ukrainian people and the over $1 billion the United States has approved just in the last several days to support Ukraine, but also to support our NATO allies along NATO's eastern flank. And of course, Canada has been a leader with your deployment in Latvia now for many years to try to ensure that NATO's eastern flank remains secure. But I think all NATO countries are going to have to consider their defense needs given the new reality that we're facing because of Russia's actions. We've seen some countries like Germany, for example, make a very bold step to increase its defense budget and meet its Wales commitment pledge of spending 2% of GDP on defense. And one would hope that Canada would make the same decision, because I think it's very clear that we are in a new reality, and all countries are going to have to step up for our collective defense needs within NATO, but then also to do what we can to support Ukraine.
In closing, I just want to ask you, I know that you were in Eastern Europe right before this escalated into a full-blown war, doing work to try to prevent precisely what we're looking at now. I can only imagine how frustrating that is for you personally, but I wonder now, as you find us in the midst of this terrible situation, how do you see this ending? Do you believe that it's diplomacy that is going to get us there, or is this going to be a military resolution?
Well, I work at the State Department, so I always have to have faith in diplomacy, and certainly the United States, working with Canada and other partners, are trying to find a way that there could be a diplomatic outcome. Unfortunately, that does not look promising as of yet. That's why we are focused so much on doing what we can to support the Ukrainian people. This war will end by Russia ending its assault and moving its troops out. And it's going to have to end by rebuilding Ukraine. It's going to be a tough fight. I think President Biden said this week to the American people that we have to be prepared for a long slog because we are not seeing any indication that Russia's looking to take its foot off the gas pedal in terms of its assault. But we need, therefore, to do whatever we can in the coming days and weeks, which will be very hard and difficult, to do what we can to support Ukraine.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.